Overweight yourself? 6'3". Notice that pains. That's one of the reasons why I'm here. I guess I'm supposed to give this to you. Am I meeting with a doctor today, or what's the blood work for? Does he have a card? Just so I have his name. So if I go to a hospital, what do I tell them? No, I'm fine. Why am I agitated? I'm curious because she said that I seem agitated. I have no idea why. And now you're asking me this. This is kind of peculiar from my perspective. I mean, you're already thinking maybe there's something wrong with me, so I don't know. It's June 2025. Now, for over the past decade, I've discussed police computer databases here in Canada known as CPIC having some very serious problems with it. For example, containing false information, inaccurate information, and information that doesn't even belong on these databases. And these databases also don't include, for example, a wrongful conviction. They'll just show a conviction. And I've also shared, for example, how these police databases have been misused for various reasons. However, there's another database that people are aware of but not, and that's medical databases. Now, these medical databases have real doctors, physicians, even nurses, entering information about a person, a patient, say in a hospital or a doctor's office visit, needing medications for a cold, or there's a broken bone or something to that effect, and all this is documented. Now, on its face, yeah, it seems like a really good idea, and in a sense it is. However, these databases also contain false information, inaccurate information, and information that shouldn't be put on there. For example, the mere opinion of a nurse or even a real doctor that gets entered into the system. And other doctors and nurses and other hospital staff see this information and make uninformed conclusions, assuming that the information that's in front of them is correct. We also have the issue of the so-called practitioners of the liberal arts, theoretical pseudoscience of psychology, being able to enter their so-called information into these systems as well. And that is a real big problem in itself, because they shouldn't have access to anything. But I digress. So these medical databases, the issue really being is inaccurate, false information. Take, for example, I'm going to use my example in Alberta, when I was dealing with my injuries and seeing my family doctor. At some point, I had noticed there was some inaccurate, false information that was entered onto the file. And I brought this to the attention of my family doctor. And he had seen it, and he was shocked. He even said that this information is not right, and the fact that it's there is not right for me. But he himself couldn't do anything about it. He made some inquiries, and etc., and it stuck there. And if I'm not mistaken, he wrote a letter or note or something to be attached to it. Whether it was finally attached or not, I don't know. But even if it was, that's buried with everything else. So what that tells you is once the information is entered, you have no recourse if it's inaccurate or false. And if you go to, for example, to have a hospital visit, and for whatever reason, no reason, just maybe a nurse is having a bad day, or just the chemistry is really off between a nurse and a patient, or a doctor and a patient, and they write something, we'll say nasty, because it's coming from a perceived authority on that database, the medical database, it's assumed that it's accurate. Why would you doubt a professional? And we have a problem now, because the next nurse or doctor that reads that information will start to form an opinion based on a limited knowledge base of what they've read. So now when they interact with an individual, say an emergency or first time meeting with the doctor, they're already formulating an opinion. And no matter what a person, a patient, says or does, they're going to be seeing what they want to see, what they're expecting to see. Now, is this much fault of, say, nurses and doctors? Not really, because they're only human beings, and they're just following how human beings are. First thing you hear is what you base it on. Very few people in this world will ignore what someone else says to form their own opinions, theories, whatever. But generally speaking, this is what's happening. And as with police computer databases, these medical databases can also be used as a weapon, or a form of revenge, which in itself is being used as a weapon. And there's nothing anyone can do to rectify information that's inaccurate or false, or it shouldn't even belong in a system. Now, if you have, for example, a nurse, first time meeting with this nurse, and she suffers from some sort of delusion and assumes that you're agitated or something, and she writes that in the notes, that's now part of that record. And then now when you're dealing with the doctor who picks up that clipboard with that information, is saying, oh, and the first thing out of their mouth is, you're agitated. Why? You're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. You see where the problem comes in? Because it just snowballs. And then if you start to say something that is perhaps out of the norm, something that most people can't relate to, now we have another problem. Because people can only base, for example, their opinion on their limited knowledge base. And if anything's outside of that, well then, that's just crazy. And here's the thing. When it comes to the liberal arts, theoretical pseudoscience of psychology, that is used as a weapon constantly, every day, even by individuals. Say, for example, you're having a conversation with someone, just say at a pub, and they're saying, it's a normal conversation, maybe there's a little group, and someone says something that you disagree with. Oh, that's just crazy, you're crazy. Not necessarily meaning it, but it's just a way to say, I don't agree with you. Kind of an extreme way. So people use that as a weapon every day. You see this a lot in comment sections, where people refer to someone being crazy or insane, or something someone did. So it is a weapon that's used all the time to discredit someone, whether it be for an individual not agreeing with someone or a group. It's a weapon. Now imagine the same scenario, but now you have some authority behind it, perceived authority. Because these so-called practitioners of the liberal arts, theoretical pseudoscience of psychology, only have perceived authority. Everything that they do, say, everything about them is just pure nonsense. Unless you give in to their authority, then you have to accept what they say. But I digress again. But now you have an authority person, whether it be a nurse, a real doctor, one of these fake doctors, saying something and then putting that to print. Well, now you have issues. And no matter how sane you are, they're going to see what they want to see. Whoever picks up that information next, they're going to simply snowball the whole thing. And there's nothing you can do about it. Now, I'm going to segue into these closing thoughts. There's a lot of people throughout history who have tried to, for example, expose first-hand knowledge with evidence. And there's different steps and stages that appear to happen to silence them. For example, different charges try to be pinned on them. Eventually, when everything else fails, it's their mental health, their mental state is off. Because that way, it basically erases everything that person has said and disqualifies them for anything that they will say. They're not going to be believed. Now, there are some stories, I'm saying stories, where even that has failed, and then there's other steps that follow to silence people. Now, I'm not stating or implying anything about myself or anything else, but I'm just simply highlighting how information, true or false, is used as a weapon. And it's one stage of, for example, silencing people. And that's my point with that. I just really want to bring awareness to the medical databases that exist and the false, inaccurate information and how it is and can be misused by professionals. I'm going to close off by saying two more points real quick. Some people think that this information, the patient, the person, has access to, and you can, say, for example, apply to the Freedom of Information and get all your medical records. However, there are loopholes that this information or some information can be redacted. For example, if any information that's contained that the patient person is not aware of that may trigger something harmful in their minds or even physically, they are allowed to redact that information under the guise of safety, say. So your medical records, although they're yours, can be redacted, so you don't see everything. And I do have first-hand experience with that as well in Alberta, for some strange reason. And I'm not going to even get into, I've discussed this before, how medical records go missing for months. But I digress once again. And the second point I would like to close off with is people think that their medical records are between the doctor and patient only. There's that confidentiality. Now that's either between a real doctor or one of these fake doctors. However, there's ways to, as a bad descriptive, circumvent that. And that is, for example, if there's a court order. If there's a court order and the court orders that this medical records be released, now it's in the courts and even potentially the public domain. So don't think that your medical records are completely private and protected. they're not. So, with all that said, just bringing awareness to medical databases. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
We are living almost in the Truman Show. If you start trying to get out, crazy stuff starts happening. You get canceled. Think about the people getting canceled. It's bizarre. One of the things that happens is Truman starts to see cracks. He walks randomly into a building that he never goes into one day, and the elevator doors open. There's no elevator there. It's just a break room for all the actors in the Truman Show. And he sees through the set, and he sees kind of behind the scenes one day, which is like someone in our life realizing that marketing and advertising and all this kind of stuff is ruining us. It's building a prison that we can't see, just like in the Truman Show. He starts questioning reality, and the moment he does that, everyone around him steps in to say, whoa, 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 man, you need to come back to Earth. You need to come back here. Stay here. You need to stay here. Which is what do our friends do when we start going hey, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do that. I don't want to participate in that. It's very eerily similar. Truman is willing to die for the truth. And if you're in the business of finding truth and your price isn't your life, then you are for sale. Your version of truth is for sale.
After 9 years, you know what I realized? Ignorance is bliss.
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, when is it going to get easier? When you die.